Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week I'm back from another week of travel, and this time I took a quick trip down to the Southeast and I attended two different video game cons. I was at the Southeast Gaming Expo in Greenville, South Carolina, and then I also went to Southern Fried Gaming Expo, which was located in Atlanta, Georgia. And if you live in that area, I highly recommend both shows. They were phenomenal. I had a booth at both of them. There were a lot of awesome people there to meet, fellow YouTubers and just all sorts of cool folks. And really good arcades at Southern Fried, and I'm a huge arcade fanatic, so that was fantastic for me. And so yeah, that's why I didn't make a video last week, but now I'm back, and I'm back into making videos. But soon, of course, we're going to have a video game convention right here in New York. So the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo is coming. It's going to be from August 12th to the 14th. I'm super excited about that. I'm personally involved in making that happen, and I hope I see you guys there. Okay, so let's get started with this week's video. So what I have here in front of me is the PC Engine GT. This is also known as the TurboExpress in North America. And so this is basically a portable version of the TurboGrafx 16. This thing was released right around the same time as the original Game Boy, and it's a pretty cool feat of engineering because, I mean, it has a full color backlit screen, and it's basically a consoleized TurboGrafx 16. So, I mean, it's really awesome. They're pretty hard to come by, and nowadays most of them have some kind of problem with electrolytic capacitors. This particular one is from Japan, which is why it's PC Engine GT. I've already repaired it by replacing the caps, and it works perfectly. And what we're going to do today is we're going to upgrade the screen with this board right here, which is the LCDDRV. So this is a board that was made available, I think about in 2020, more or less. But because of the global part shortage, these have become basically unobtainium. they weren't being made. Although now, fortunately, you can find a few of these on AliExpress. And so a friend of mine who owns this GT recently picked this up on AliExpress. And so what I'm going to do today is install it. And I'm not entirely sure if it's changed or if it's the same as the ones that were available a few years ago. So let's go ahead, get it installed, and find out. But before we get started, let me take a moment to thank PCBWay.com for sponsoring this week's project. Now, PCBWay does a phenomenal job with manufacturing PCB prototypes, but that's not all that they can do for your projects. PCBWay now has a new OEM service, which is a full turnkey contract manufacturing service. This OEM service includes product design, product development, engineering validation, PCB assembly, manufacturing, and supply chain management. So, if you need a partner to assist with all aspects of developing a product, then PCBWay has got you covered. Thanks again for your support, and now let's get back to this week's project. Okay, so let's go ahead and disassemble this PC Engine GT. So there are going to be 4 large long screws like this that are in these 4 openings here, and then there are 2 smaller Phillips screws down here in the battery compartment. So those are easy enough to take out. Once that's out, you got to lift it up and then just angle it out carefully because you've got 3 flex cables that connect both halves to each other. So this one here is for the screen, and this one here is for the controller PCB. And then the final one over here, this is for the screen as well. It does the backlight, I believe. There's also this little flex cable here. This is for this external port. We're going to disconnect that. That's for like the TV tuner accessory. And finally, there's a single screw right over here. And then the power switch normally is here, but for whatever reason, this time it came out on the other side. So yeah, you just got to unplug this. This connects the battery terminals. And now we can go ahead and just flip this thing around. And then the last 3 screws are right here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those, and then we'll have this thing out to take a look at. Okay, so now the board is completely removed from the shell, and I just wanted to show you all of the new capacitors that I installed on this unit. So with the TurboExpress or the GT, it is extremely important that before you even buy a new screen for this or think about it, the first thing you've got to do is get it working. That's definitely challenging because all of these systems have really bad electrolytic capacitors. All of them fail. They leak all over the board. Sometimes they cut traces, and so repairing these can be really tough. This one thankfully was not that bad. So the capacitors were all bad and they had leaked, but they didn't cause any kind of permanent damage. So I was able to remove all of them, clean up all the old electrolyte, remove all of the corroded solder, and then install all of these new surface mount caps. I got this as a kit with Console 5. They have really nice kits for the Express or the GT. They also have caps with leads on them instead, 3-hole caps instead of these surface mounts. So if you're more comfortable with that kind of design, you can do that instead. It's not mandatory to use surface mount, but this is a much cleaner install, and I normally try to prefer this whenever possible. All right, so now that that is all done, what we're going to be doing is focusing over here on this little connector. So I've got to desolder this RF shield because it's going to be in the way. And what we're going to do is we're going to solder 4 wires onto this little connector right here. And then I'll explain what each one of them does once it's all set. Okay, let's start with that. Okay, so all of those connections have been made, and I'm just going to describe what they are. So pin number 1 over here, this is ground, and then pins 5, 6, 7 are RGB. Specifically, this one here is green, the yellow wire here, this is actually red, and this purple wire here is blue. So it's not RGB here on the connector, it's actually green, red, blue. So once you remember that, you just got to follow the connections and put them onto the respective pads over here. And so that's all there is to it. If you saw in the cut, I also, desoldered this connector here, and that's just so that I can have a much more stable connection on all of these points. It's very easy to remove. All you have to do really is just add solder to all the pins and just kind of pull on it. And these little pieces of glue will be the only things holding it, and it'll just kind of come right off safely. In retrospect, it might be easier to do this if you use 30 gauge Kynar wire. In this case, I'm using thicker 28 gauge wire, which is fine. It works, but it's a lot easier to bridge that kind of wire because it's just rather thick. Depending on your soldering skills, you may want to try a smaller gauge here just to make this whole process a little bit easier. Okay, so now that this is done, let's move on to connecting C-Sync. Okay, so now that RGB and ground are all taken care of, we're going to add C-Sync in. And so the way to tap in C-Sync is right over here. There's this little via that's right next to this D204 marking on the silk screen. This is on the opposite side of the board that I was working on. So you can see I took a blade and I just scraped away the solder resist so that this little via is exposed. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a very small piece of Kynar wire like this. We're going to pass it through and we're going to solder it on this side. And then the other side is going to go to the C-Sync pad. Okay, so now that those connections are all made, there's actually only 2 more wires to connect to both the LCDDRV and the PC Engine GT motherboard. So we namely have to get 5 volts and ground between the 2 boards. So to tap into 5 volts, we're going to do that right over here on this plane of this transistor. This is 5 volts right here. And then for ground, I'm just going to pick this little pad here. This is where the RF shield used to be, and this is a ground. Okay, so there's just two more things that we really need to do before we move on to actually testing the screen and seeing how things look. So first thing we've got to do is we're going to be removing this little transistor over here, which is labeled as Q507, and we're going to run a little bodge wire going from the upper part of this transistor, the pad there, that is, not the transistor, that pad going to this side of C511. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. Okay, so now that that's all finished, there's only one other thing we can do, and this is actually kind of optional, but you see this little pad over here with these 2 points bridged. This actually is a little jumper that sends power to the high voltage portions of the board for powering the backlight. And so this is needed for the original screen, but we actually don't need this anymore. So I'm actually just gonna swipe at this here, use a little flux, and open up this bridge, get rid of this bridge. There we go. And that should make the GT a little bit more power efficient. Okay, so with that, I believe all of the soldering is done. So now let's go ahead and reassemble and do a quick test. Okay, so I've got the GT reassembled for a quick test. So you can see all the wiring going to the control board. I've plugged in the screen. I still have the screen protective cover on because I'm not done with the install yet. So let's just go ahead and give it a quick power on, and I have my EverDrive. Let's see what that does. Okay, that's good. All right, awesome. Looks very good. It'll look even better once I remove the screen protector, but for now I know that everything is working. I can't go further than this because the control ports are not connected. The pad is, you know, on the other piece, on the other half of the PC Engine GT. I just wanted to make sure that everything was in good shape. All right, so now that I know that things are in good shape, we're going to move on to cutting the front half of the GT so that it can accommodate the new screen. All right, so I have taken the front half of the GT and I removed all of the contents, so it's just the plastic now. And so this is probably the part of the mod I really hate the most because it means I have to cut open this whole area here. So what I'm using here is a 3D printed bracket that is provided by Console 5. And the way that it works is it comes with this little jig here, which you just put in the front. And I'm going to use a permanent ink marker to just mark off where I need to cut, like so. Okay, so that gives me a rough framework of what I've got to do. And so I'm going to come in with a pair of flush cutters and with a blade, and I'm going to go ahead and trim all of that. And then once that's all done, I'm also going to cut this off, this post, because I'm going to preserve these three, but this final one needs to be removed, like so. And I'm also going to notch in a little bit of space here on these two posts. That will allow the screen to go as far up as possible because it really needs to for this to work. So, and then this piece here is going to come in and lock it into place. All right, so let's get started with trimming the front shell. All right, so I have taken care of opening up this area for the new screen, and so you can see that there's plenty of space now, and here's the glass screen cover, which looks really, really nice. And so to start the installation process, what you got to do is take this 3D printed part from Console 5, and you face it like this with the kind of textured part facing up towards you, and it should just snap right into place like where the speaker is, and that really doesn't go anywhere, you know, once you lock it in. And then the speaker has to have the wires rotated so that they're to the right-hand side, like you see I've done. So now the new screen should just slide right into place, although I do see a little bit of filament. Hang on a second. Let me get that out of here. There we go. There was just a little piece of 3D printed filament in the way, and I didn't want that to stay behind. So you see how the screen just slots right in without any trouble. And then now we're going to place this like so. And then I have these tall screws that were holding the original screen in place, and now I'm just going to screw them in to hold everything down. And I think over here I use a thinner, not as tall, a shorter screw rather, that's what I was trying to say. This shorter screw holds this guy into place. Okay, so now the screen is not going to be going anywhere. The last thing is just to flip this guy and lock it in place over here. Pretty tight fit. All right, so I'll work on that. I may have to do that off camera, or at most hot glue it, absolute worst case, but I don't think that should be necessary. All right, so I'll be back in a few minutes, and then we're gonna go ahead and do a quick dry run and see if everything looks good. Okay, so it was pretty easy to figure out. I actually just had to unscrew these, attach the board, and then reattach everything. So I've got everything plugged in, so now let me just flip this thing over, and we're gonna just do a quick dry run here. Come on now. And there we go, and that looks absolutely gorgeous. Okay, I wanted to just make sure that the screen was perfectly centered and everything was looking correct, and thankfully it is. So now I'm gonna go ahead, close things up, and then let's just do a final comparison between the original stock screen and the new one. Okay, so here's a comparison shot that I'm taking, you know, just before doing the mod, so you can see what the original stock screen looks like. And so again, bear in mind that for, you know, late 80s, early 90s, this is actually pretty impressive, and it's got a nice backlit screen, but you know, there's ghosting. A lot of these are known for having dead pixels, and you know, text is really hard to read. It's not that crisp, but overall it's just generally pretty unimpressive, and it's kind of small too. So yeah, for a variety of reasons it makes sense to upgrade this. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the finished product. All right, so here is the final result, and this is the new LCDDRV screen, and you can see it is really just a huge improvement over the original screen. Everything is bright, crisp. You can really see all the details. It's a much larger screen, and you don't have ghosting, and you know, it's basically a modern screen. You can put it at all sorts of weird angles and see it, and there aren't any issues. So yeah, I mean, I really love this, and I think that if you happen to have a GT or an Express, it'll definitely look a lot better with this modern screen. You know, that being said, you know, there's nothing wrong with the old screen either. Like my personal TurboExpress, I've actually left it original just because they're pretty rare and I only have one. If I happen to ever get a second one, I would totally do the mod. But for now, since I only have one, I'm keeping it original. But that's just my personal preference. There's nothing wrong with either choice, but I just wanted to show you guys this option. It looks phenomenal, and it's really not that hard to install either. All right, so that's it for this week's video. If you like this kind of content, then definitely subscribe to the channel. Check out the upcoming Long Island Retro Gaming Expo this August 12th to the 14th. And right now my website is shut down, and that's mainly just because I've been traveling a lot and also because I need to prepare for the show. But you can still reach me, so if you have stuff that you want repaired or modified, you can still contact me at oneuprestorations.com. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.